It's counting.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. This is a really great turnout for our first potluck. So as I was preparing this presentation, it was quite interesting because my brain had all these things that I wanted to say, and I didn't want to keep you guys here for hours and hours. So I really pared it down and tried to get the focus for the beginning and why we're eating this way. And if this sounds scripted, it is because I get really excited when I talk about this stuff and then I go off on little tangents, and we would be here all night. So instead of being for an hour, I got it down to like 20 minutes. So that should be really good, and then we can continue visiting. So on behalf of my husband and myself, we want to thank you all for coming to our first low-carb potluck. We hope to continue the low-carb community to grow the low-carb community in our area and share delicious recipes, as well as provide education on how to live the low-carb life safely and sustainably. So who here has heard of the keto diet? Why is my... Oh, are you kidding me? Technical difficulties?
We're all just going to keep our hands raised.
Laura, you've heard, raise your hand.
I had a raise.
She did raise. She lowered it quickly because she knew it didn't need to be up.
We'll just...
That'll work.
Oh, now it's working. Okay. Have you heard you can lose a ton of weight quickly? Yes. Who knows someone who has done keto? Just about everyone here. Who knows someone that didn't eat fruit, hardly any vegetables, drank weird oils, eventually quit and regained all their weight along with a few additional pounds?
Yep.
Yes. Who thinks the keto diet is a fad diet?
I used to.
If you're like me, then you know at least one person, which you all do, that fits these descriptions. If you would have told me a year ago that we would have moved our whole family over to the low-carb, high healthy fat living, I would have said you were crazy. If you would have told me a year ago that I would have a blog, be teaching about low-carb, high healthy fat living, holding potlucks, and talking to you all right now, I would have said you were more than insane. Why? Because I knew people that were doing keto, and they were doing some pretty odd and, in my opinion, dangerous things to their body. They would avoid protein because it could turn into glucose. But we know that we need protein for our muscles and our health. For many people, it's the high-fat part of the low-carb way of eating that bothers them, because they buy into the myth that cholesterol and fat cause heart disease. However, that wasn't the case for me. For me, it was the strange eating habits that I was witnessing. It was not understanding what nutritional ketosis was. It was listening to fear-mongering instead of actually researching studies, science, and the history of the ketogenic diet for myself. If you think the keto diet is only for weight loss or fat people, wipe that thought from your mind. You can be skinny on the outside and unhealthy on the inside with fat surrounding your vital organs. This can actually be more dangerous, as it can be a silent killer to the unsuspecting thin person. I will talk more on that at another time. So the low-carb, healthy, fat lifestyle is for everyone. Everyone benefits from eating whole foods while eliminating grains, wheat, and processed foods from our diets. While we are speaking of the word diet, let's look at the history of the word. When we hear the word diet, what do we typically think of? We think of losing weight. We think of eating nothing but salads and starving ourselves. We say things like, oh, I can't eat that, I'm on a diet, with the plans of going off our diet once our ideal weight is reached. The word diet doesn't mean to lose weight. At least it didn't start out that way. The word diet simply means the food and drink we habitually consume. The early origins actually come from the Greek word diaetia, which I know I slaughtered the pronunciation of that, but it means way of life. In its original context, dieta wasn't solely focused on eating certain foods to achieve weight loss. It was meant to represent our entire way of life, encompassing food, drink, lifestyle, and exercise. We need to change our way of thinking when it comes to diet. We need to dispel this myth that we go on a diet to lose weight. When I speak of diets, I am speaking of a way of eating or a way of life. Everyone eats a diet, whether it's a vegetarian diet, a carnivore diet, or even a fast food diet. Of course, tonight, the diet we're going to discuss is the low-carb ketogenic diet or way of life. While weight loss is a secondary benefit, it is an important one, as being overweight often leads to chronic illness and disease. Losing weight aids in the reversing or slowing of those diseases. Some of the other, and in my opinion, primary health benefits of adopting this way of life are improved acne, reduced symptoms of ADD and ADHD, improved autism function, lower risk of Alzheimer's, and slowing the disease if it's already showing signs, improved blood pressure, reversing type 2 diabetes, lowering the amount of insulin that a type 1 diabetic needs, lowering the risk of diabetic complications, eliminating sugar addiction, improved cholesterol, reducing gout, reduced migraines and headaches, reverse insulin resistance and other metabolic disorders, better mental clarity, more energy, hormone balance, and these only name a few, literally just scratching the surface of the health benefits that this lifestyle brings. I'll be speaking on these as well as all the other benefits as potlucks continue in the future. At this point, I want to add the disclaimer that any advice given is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any medical conditions. If you're on medications or have a medical condition, you may need to consult with your doctor for any medication questions. So, who invented the low carbohydrate diet? Was it Dr. Atkins with his weight loss revolution in 1972? Or Wilder and Peterman's anti-seizure diet at the Mayo Clinic in the 1920s? Or maybe Banting's pamphlet in Britain in 1863? The answer is actually none of the above. For sure, it was long before any of these documented ways of eating. The earliest documentation that I've been able to find out about the low-carb, high-healthy-fat way of eating was from the late 1700s. Though there's evidence of low-carb eating for centuries, it just wasn't documented because it was the norm. That's how people ate. Sometimes referred to as the father of the low-carb way of eating, Jean Brillat-Savarin wrote the textbook Philosophy of Taste in 1825, in which he wrote, "The second of the chief causes of obesity is the floury and starchy substances which man makes the prime ingredients of his daily nutrition." Several decades later, William Banting rediscovered the fattening properties of the refined carbohydrates. In his 30s, he started gaining weight. By age 62, he weighed 202 pounds. He sought weight loss advice from his physicians, but when eating less and increased exercise failed to lose his weight, he then followed the advice of his surgeon. Banting cut out all sugary and starchy foods such as bread, milk, beer, sweets, and potatoes. He not only lost the weight and kept it off, but he also felt so well that he was compelled to write his famous pamphlet, Letter of Corpulence, which was published in 1863. This pamphlet is considered the world's first diet book. So I don't think it's just one of those little leaflet pamphlets, but it was considered a pamphlet. For most of the next century, diets low in refined carbohydrates were accepted as the standard treatment for obesity, and by the 1950s, it was considered the norm. It was standard advice. So what exactly does the low carb or ketogenic way of eating consist of? Eating whole foods. You eat meat, fish, eggs, vegetables that grow above ground, and natural fats like butter. You avoid sugar and starchy foods like breads, pastas, rice, beans, and potatoes. You eat when you're hungry and stop when you're satisfied. It can literally be that simple. You don't need to count calories or weigh food. You don't need low-fat products, which are generally higher in sugar and other fillers. This is a good visual of the foods that you eat. So to the left of the screen is the lesser carbohydrates, 0, and to the right is where you start going up. So lots of variety of food. And these are the things that you want to avoid. We don't want to eat a ton of fruit. We're meant to eat fruit seasonally. That's how it was done. With agriculture, now we can get fruit anytime we want, but we're not meant to eat fruit all the time. And our fruit is actually bred to be a lot sweeter than what it was many years ago. Potatoes are extremely starchy, and you can see as you start going up the rice and then the bread, juice. This is pure sugar. So these are things that we want to eliminate from our eating. So there are different levels of strictness when you look at the low carbohydrate way of eating. You have liberal low carb, which is 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrate a day. Moderate, which is 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. And the strict ketogenic, which is 20 grams or under. Now you'll notice that all of these have some carbohydrates. It's because this is a low carbohydrate way of eating, not a no carbohydrate way of eating. So our vegetables, things like spinach, those all have carbs, but those are the good carbs. You'll also see the difference between the plates. The moderate has a little bit of root vegetable, it has some carrots. The liberal has some sweet potatoes along with the carrots. What you see is none of these plates have refined carbohydrates. None of them have breads, none of them have rice. So just because they're a little more carbs, the carbs are still coming from those good vegetables. This is a very individual thing. Everyone needs to decide where they want to be and what their goals are, and that's going to dictate what kind of plate, what kind of way of life you need. Do you need to be strict, moderate, or liberal? So we want to switch from using carbohydrates as our primary fuel to using fat as our primary fuel. Let's take a look at the two main sources of fuel, carbohydrates and fats. Now protein is in here because if you were in a starvation mode, such as the prisoners in a World War II camp, they did not have hardly any food. So our bodies are not stupid. God designed them to be very smart. They broke down protein, and that's how they survived. But they were very skinny, and they had almost no muscle mass. Typically, if you have carbohydrates or fats, that's what your body's going to use for energy source. It is not going to break down the protein. However, if you eat too much protein that you don't need for your muscles or things like that, that can be turned into glucose and then could be stored as fat. So it is kind of hard to overeat protein, but it can be done depending on what your goals are. So if we look, for every gram of carbohydrate that we eat, we get 4 calories of energy. But for every gram of fat, we get 9 calories of energy. Do not be alarmed by the word calorie. A calorie is a unit of food used by the body for various functions, such as breathing, building new muscle and bone, pumping blood, and other metabolic tasks. All foods can be divided into these 3 macronutrient groups: fat, protein, and carbohydrates. The macro and macronutrients refer to the fact that the bulk of the food we eat is made up of these 3 groups. We limit the intake of our dietary carbohydrates. We keep our protein moderate to just what our bodies are going to need, and we eat healthy fats to satiety. When we get more energy from less food, we are satisfied for longer periods of time. There are many studies, such as the Women's Health Initiative, that prove cutting calories does not produce long-term weight loss. We also don't need to fear fat. Studies now show there's no reason to fear natural fats. Fat is your friend. If we look at these two Time magazine covers, the first one on the left is from 1984, the start of the intense fear of fat. Instead of natural food, we got lots of low-fat products loaded with added sugars and starch. This, not so coincidentally, marked the start of the modern obesity epidemic. The second cover is more current, from 2014. It says, "Eat butter." And the story in the magazine is about how scientists are now realizing they were wrong to fear fat. What a difference 30 years can make. So instead, on a low-carb diet, you minimize your intake of sugar and starches, and you can eat all the fats you need to feel satisfied. When you avoid sugar and starches, your blood sugar tends to stabilize, and the levels of the fat-storing hormone insulin drop. This increases your fat burning and makes you feel more satisfied while reducing your food intake and causing the weight loss. Studies show that a low-carb diet, way of eating, can make it easier to lose weight and to control your blood sugar, among many other benefits. When we look at the current SAD food guidelines for the standard American diet, which, I might add, didn't come out until the late 1970s. So how did we know how to eat before then? We can see it's the complete opposite of the low-carb keto food pyramid, which is just whole foods and no processed stuff. For much of history, many cultures did not have carbohydrates. For example, agricultural carbohydrates such as wheat and rye didn't come to north of the Alps until brought by the Romans after the time of Christ. The Irish, Scandinavians, and Russians had no agricultural carbs suitable to their climate until the potato emigrated from the Andes to Europe in the 16th century. Many of our ancestors had little exposure to high proportions of dietary carbohydrates until 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. And for many aberrational cultures, their choice of a low carbohydrate lifestyle persisted to within the last few hundred years, when agriculture was pretty much forced upon them. But they made the choice until they basically had no choice. I'm not going to go much deeper into the science during this talk about low carb and the specifics of how it works, as I want to focus on just getting you up and started. But I will speak more on details at later potlucks. The first couple weeks, and even a month for some, can be a little rough as your body is trying to adjust to the change in fuels. You may feel flu-like, have headaches and or muscle cramps. This is typically known as the induction period or the keto flu. The best way to minimize these and even to prevent them completely is to increase fluids, especially water, increase your salt intake, I can't stress that enough, increase your fat intake, and ensure you have enough minerals like magnesium. When living a ketogenic low-carb lifestyle, we need to go out of our way to think about salt and add it because we need more. We have been told to lower sodium intake for our blood pressure and health. However, this, like fat being bad for us, is a myth. When you eat ketogenically, the need for salt increases dramatically as one of the effects is inflammation goes down. The reason inflammation goes down is because your body is not storing as much fluid. So it starts to expel the fluid, and guess what? When fluid starts getting expelled, so does sodium, because it's water soluble. So it's going to start passing through your system more readily. Also, as our insulin levels start to lower, our kidneys will let go of stored fluid. And with this, our sodium will get flushed out as well. So you have to keep a minimum amount of sodium in your body so you can compensate for the fact that you're expelling it much more. We actually need 3,000 to 6,000 milligrams of sodium per day, leaning to the higher end if you live in hot climates, sweat a lot, or work out a lot, because you're going to flush that out even more. 1 teaspoon of salt contains 2,325 milligrams of sodium. So for most folks, 2 to 3 teaspoons of a good salt per day will give adequate sodium levels. The easiest way that I found to get extra salt in is just to take pinches, pop it in, and then chase it down with water, because I'm weird and don't like a lot of really salty foods. You want a good salt, like a pink Himalayan salt or a good sea salt, not the Morton's cruddy table salt. Pickle juice is also a really good way to get extra sodium in, and I will drink that too. So, increasing our salt intake can also help with sugar cravings, lower blood pressure, better immunity, more energy, and so much more. I cannot recommend enough to read this book so that you can have a more complete understanding of how salt works. Salt Fix was a really eye-opening book, and it is available at the library, though I ended up buying my own copy. So I now make sure that I have extra salt every day, and I feel so much better doing that. For muscle cramps, among other issues, magnesium is a critical mineral that so many people are lacking in. Magnesium is responsible for over 700 body functions, and over 70% of the population is deficient in it. However, you don't want just any magnesium off the store shelf, since that could actually make things worse. Minerals are hard for our system to absorb, and if we take ones that don't absorb well, our body will hoard them in areas they shouldn't be, such as kidneys, gallbladder, and lungs, to name a few. When choosing minerals, you want to be sure that they are food-sourced mineral, they're whole food, chelated, and complete. My family and I use the Neolife Magnesium Blend because it's all 3 forms of magnesium, completely whole food, ultra pure, chelated, which increases the absorption up to about 90%, so I can actually take less and get more. Plus, it's super affordable. Now, one might venture to say that we could get all of this from our food. The problem is we can't. Our food sources, organic or not, are depleted of so many nutrients, and they're not as nutritious as they were even 50 years ago. If we look at this, just that time difference, how much we have to eat today of spinach compared to in 1953 to get the same amount of iron per day. So every way of eating, every diet has gaps that need to be filled. Now, if you have a magnesium that is working well for you and you like that, that is terrific. That's awesome. I'm not trying to sell anyone anything, but if you need a magnesium to fill your gaps and you want more information on the Neolife Magnesium, feel free to ask. So to recap, the ketogenic diet is a way of life, not a fad diet or a lose weight quick diet. It is healthy and helpful for everyone. We eat whole foods, no processed foods, keep carbohydrates low and from above ground vegetables, eat moderate protein and fat to satiety. There's no need for counting calories. Isn't that awesome? I love that I don't have to count calories. Increase your fluids, salt, magnesium to help with the transition phase. Though in all truth, those things should be done on a regular basis every day. If you need help with meal ideas or want an easy to start ideas, I highly encourage you to visit dietdoctor.com. You can sign up for their 2-week meal challenge. Challenge is kind of the wrong word. It's just a nice way to have 2 weeks of meals laid out for you. They have hundreds of recipes, so if you don't like one of them, you can swap it out. But it's just a nice way to get started and taste different foods without being overwhelmed. So I'd like to add a closing comment. We have become one of the most obese countries in the world. The United States is currently reassessing a nearly 4-decade uncontrolled experiment in which carbohydrates were praised and fats were demonized. However, it takes a lot longer, it takes a long time for the medical literature to catch up. So we must be our own advocates and promote a healthier way of life while reversing and ending chronic disease. Reading good books, like the ones that I have on the table and pictured here, and listening to good doctors and scientists, reading good research and studies are ways that we can really learn and advocate for ourselves and help others advocate for themselves. So I'd like to thank you all for listening, and now I can open it up for any questions. Any questions at all?
I just now got a message that said, I think this is from a guy I know in California. It says, I think I'm ready to start a keto diet. Any suggestions? I said, I will get back to you.
Perfect timing.
You had a question, Hen?
Is there a book on keto that you would recommend that we could get from the library?
I
I'm
don't.
sure there are a lot.
Yes, and I am very picky about where I get my information from, because there are so many people out there just trying to sell you keto supplements or fit the science to the program that they're trying to sell. So anytime that I recommend an author or a book or a podcast, I have researched them to know there's no conflict of interest. Jimmy Moore's book, Keto Clarity, which I have over there, that is a good starting book. The library does not have it, but you're welcome to borrow my book if you'd like. And also Audible has it on audio. I'm just in the middle of reading Finian Volek's book, The Science and Art of Low Carb Living. So that is proving to be a very good book. I would also suggest looking up YouTube videos for Low Carb Down Under, Low Carb Breckenridge. And all the people that are asked to speak there are very good people to speak. They cannot speak there if they have any conflict of interest. So you can make sure what they're telling you is solid, because they're not trying. There have been a couple that have had conflict of interest, but not here in the States, and it was for something because they were selling a book. Well, that's how we learn, is through reading, but they're not trying to sell you a program with supplements. You don't need any specific keto supplements. Good whole food supplements, yes, but other than that, you don't need anything. So I think Jimmy Moore's book would be a good starting point. It's written in layman's terms, so it's very easy to understand. That would be a good jumping off book. Also, not that you're obese, but Dr. Fung, his book, Obesity Code, it goes into fasting, which will be another discussion, but he really talks about the hormones and insulin and why we eat ketogenically. So those would be two really good ones that I would recommend starting out with. And if I run across anything else, I'll be sure to send
Sure.
you. Yeah.
I haven't listened to, I was thinking of going on TED Talks. Would there be anything on TED Talks?
There might be. Let me check.
That would be another thing.
Because there would be.
I used to listen to those all the time.
Yeah, so I know that there are a few TED Talks. It just depends on what you're looking for. Dr. Boz, B-O-Z, and I can't remember her first name. She's phenomenal. She's very good, and I know she has a couple. She has some TED Talks too. So yeah,
You know,
those would be
even
good.
when, because I was relatively new when we did the Diet Doctor, even in there, if you go on that website, the Diet Doctor,
Yes,
it
Diet
breaks
Doctor
it down
has a
really
ton.
nice and simple to explain why it
Yep.
does what it does and how.
Yep.
And then like there's so many different ideas that
If you sign up for the Diet Doctor paid membership, you get a month free. And the membership gets you access to all their videos, which are put on by doctors, and then just a slew of documentaries. So Fathead the movie is on there. My Big Fat Diet. If you're interested in working out while eating ketogenically, there's a lot on there. But I would highly recommend doing the 30-day trial and then seeing where that takes you. It's and then it's $10 a month, but I think it's totally worth it.
And even just the 2-week one that's free, there's so much
Yeah, the 2-week
information in
challenge.
there.
Yep.
Because that's what I do. And
Gina?
there's so much stuff
Yes.
in there.
For a nursing mother, how many carbs are good? I heard somewhere around 50. Is that what
Yep.
you've
So
heard?
what I
and
have
carbs
found.
from what foods?
So what I have found is for a nursing or pregnant mother, carbs between 20 to 50 grams is good, and you want to keep them from those above ground vegetables. Maybe some sweet potatoes, some carrots. You definitely do not want to have them from the rice, the pasta, the breads. And
Right.
at another talk, I will be talking about why wheat is so bad for us, and exploring the book, The Wheat Belly, which is available at the library, and I do need to get a copy of it myself. So, but yeah, so those good whole foods increasing, and then I would also encourage a pregnant and nursing mother to really increase their fats, because we need more calories when we're pregnant and nursing, but you don't want to get them from the crappy. So if you can